Hello, Robert. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Today's guest is Robert Xavier Burden. And if you haven't seen his work, you're definitely missing out, in my opinion, one of the most unique, exciting, popular artists out there. The way I personally describe Robert's art style would be if you were to take a Renaissance master painter and have them paint popular toys from our childhood. Robert paints toys like Star Wars, Batman, Thundercats, He-Man, and many others. I really encourage you to visit his Instagram page and check out his work. So, Robert, where can people see your work and connect with you?
To see the work in person, most everyone looks at everything online these days. I always want people to try to see the work in person. Unfortunately, the only painting of mine that I believe is on display for the public would be the Star Wars painting, the 20th Century Space Opera, which is currently on temporary loan at the at Rancho Obi-Wan, which is a Star Wars memorabilia museum up in Petaluma, California. And then in about 10 months, which is coming up faster than I'd like, I'll have a 4-month-long solo retrospective exhibition at the Oceanside Museum of Art that opens February of 2023.
Listeners, please connect with Robert, and I appreciate if you hit the subscribe and like button for our show. So, Robert, we're definitely going to talk about 20th Century Space Opera, but before we get to something like that, let's talk about your background and how you found your love for art.
I always loved art. I always loved drawing as a kid. I drew every day. I drew incessantly. I didn't really grow up in a art-centric family. It was a very sport-centric family, but it was around the age of 16 that I really wanted to, or I decided that I really wanted to pursue art more seriously. I wanted to learn as much as I could about making art and being an artist, but also, even back then at that age, I really wanted to learn about art history, art theory. I probably had more interest in 20th century art theory as a 17-year-old than I do today. But it was a bit of a sponge back then. But, I certainly wasn't, I wouldn't say that I was encouraged to pursue art. It wasn't something that I don't think anybody in my family would have wanted for me. But it was, as I was getting older, it was increasingly becoming my focus and my passion, and decided to study it in university, and it sort of snowballed from there.
I've always been curious about high school students that all of a sudden that light bulb turns on and they say, you know what, I want to pursue this as a career. For you personally, Robert, when you decided to pursue a career in art, was it because you were better than most of people in your class and you said, you know what, I really do have a strong chance of making a career out of this? Or was it just strictly, I just enjoyed it so much and there's no other way I can have a career other than doing art as a professional artist?
I think that's a good question. I think we live in a culture of sort of the myth of the prodigy, right? Where if you're not amazing at something at 12 years old, you shouldn't bother pursuing it, which is nonsense. I think passion is more important than some sort of prodigious sort of God-given ability, or however you want to phrase it. That kind of ideology prevents people from working hard to pursue something that they're really passionate about. I was not a prodigy. I was a good drawer. I was a very good drawer as a kid. I didn't do my first oil painting until I think I was 17, maybe 18, and it certainly wasn't very good. I think drawing ultimately led me to painting. Drawing, if you have a really intense interest in drawing, it's probably because you have an artistic side to you. That doesn't mean that you have to pursue fine art. You could pursue graphic design or animation or illustration or architecture, fashion. I mean, drawing is the foundation for almost every visual art form. But for me, it was fine art. I loved museums. I loved going to look at art. I certainly kept it quiet. I mean, I wasn't the art kid in school. I was very good at drawing and I worked hard at it, and it was something that I kept kind of quiet. I didn't I didn't talk a lot about art. If a friend called me up and asked me if I wanted to go to a party, I would say, no, sorry, I'm busy. I'm going to some sports event or something, when I was probably just staying home and drawing. But it's hard to say how drawing for me turned into just an intense interest in fine art, in the visual arts. And I don't know precisely when that happened, but yeah, it did for me, and it does for a lot of people. And I'm sure a lot of people find their own unique path to fine art. It's not a path that's set in stone, and it's not a path that has any clear defined, there is no clear defined path to doing it or how you get there, but you're certainly going to have a passion for it at some point in order to pursue it. Because it's not a job, it's a bit of a calling.
I want to transition to your actual art, and I was having a discussion with my brother about our upbringing and how many of our influences on our creativity as artists was stuff that we saw in our childhood, things around us visually, whether it was like choose your own adventure books or watching Star Wars or even cartoons like He-Man. They were all like really truly major influences on my brother and I. And so to see you paint these toy characters in the way that you do, surrounded by these ornate shapes and the sheer size of your art, was just mind-blowing. But take us back to why you chose to paint these characters from our youth in the way you do.
I was going through the response that I've often told people is that I was going through a box of old toys that I hadn't seen in a long time. And I was struck by how uninteresting they were to me as an adult. And yet as a child, they could captivate my imagination for months. These cheap pieces of plastic, mass produced for millions of kids. And I adored them as a child. I could take them outside and create all sorts of imaginative, incredible, scenarios and fight scenes I wanted to try to recapture that. There's an irony to the work that I really loved, in that, I'm making absurdly labor-intensive, ambitious, large-scale paintings that glorify, a cheap piece of plastic that was, mass-produced for millions of kids. But these things, mattered to a lot of people, and obviously there's a enormous nostalgia element, especially to the earlier work in this series. There was a huge nostalgia element to it, and people often use the term nostalgia as a pejorative, as some sort of negative. I view nostalgia as one of the most powerful forces in the world, and I didn't want to sort of abuse the nostalgia, a feeling of nostalgia. I didn't want to exploit it. I wanted to have some sort of interesting, ironic take on the work, but still very much, honor that nostalgia, honor that love that I had for these things, and that millions of kids had for these things, and hold sort of semi-sacred.
The early versions of your art, particularly when we're talking about these toys, were they instantaneously what I see on your website, or was there a evolution to get to that?
How do you mean? I mean,
just on the sheer fact that it's just something I've never seen before, or it's never been visually displayed, at least from all the art that I see, the way you actually visually tell the story. Did it start out looking like this, or did it have an evolution to get to this the way it looks now?
So before I was painting, sort of figurative paintings, and they had this sort of old Baroque religious aesthetic, and I am to an extent just kind of reappropriating old religious art, old Christian art, old Islamic art, a lot of old European art. I mean, that's, in some cases, that's directly where I'm taking, in many cases, I'm directly taking my source material from old medieval art, which is a time period of art that I love and adore. Very ornate stuff, and a way of automatically giving something, they said, a kind of sacred, semi-sacred, religious sort of connotation, more, or of a feeling of being more important than maybe it is, through ornamentation, through symmetry, through decorative motifs. And I'm not the only artist that uses decorative motifs. There's, I think, in the 21st century, there's so many artists and there's so many people working in every different kind of style imaginable that there's always going to be other people out there that are similar to you. They may not have the same concept, though. They may not have the same subject matter, but stylistically, there's always somebody similar, at least a few artists that are going to be similar, and I think that's okay. That's a good thing to an extent. You need that creates a kind of movement in a way. But for me, the evolution of the work itself was more like, well, I wanted to have a decorative motif because, decorative motifs sort of automatically make something important. It was a way of filling the background, so I could just really focus on the figure itself. Originally, I thought about making that, the Battle Cat was the first giant toy painting that I made. It was about 9 feet wide, and I thought about just not having any pattern, just the toy. And it felt a little bit lacking. It certainly, the entire focus was the figure, the Battle Cat figure, but it felt like it needed something to push it to the realm of religiosity. And I didn't want to do it at that point overtly. So rather than use a religious source, I was using wallpaper and carpet fabric patterns from my childhood home, which it's just lucky that I have a mom who held on to a lot of, extra rolls of wallpaper. It's quite phenomenal how much stuff my mom has saved over the years in terms of fabric patterns for sofas and, little samples of wallpaper pattern that we used for the kitchens or the bathrooms. But that was, the earliest work, 2006 to 2010 was sort of patterns from my childhood home, and then it evolved as I became a much better painter. It evolved to a much more decorative, ornamental, religious kind of structure to the painting.
I was thinking about this because I was watching this YouTube discussion, and the discussion was about our generation, right? And for myself being in my 40s, they were talking about how people in our 40s now are starting to run organizations. They're also at the height of their earning power. And with that earning power, they're using their income to buy things that are dear to our hearts, right? Things that are nostalgic from our childhood. So are these the people that are typically buying your work? And what are the typical responses people have when they see your work?
Yeah, it's, one of the things that I was told by a friend of mine who's sort of in the toy industry is that, this was a long time ago that he told this to me. He says, well, you're doing this too soon, because 2006, when I started this body of work, it was too soon for any kind of collector base. And, I didn't really care at the time. I said, well, this is what I'm really passionate about. I think there's something, important for me in this work. And despite all the reasons why maybe I shouldn't be making 12-foot tall paintings of toys and spending, insane amounts of time to do this, I believed in the work, despite the fact that whatever collector base may exist, it's probably just not old enough to be buying this stuff yet. Because art is, as you say, it's art. Art is something you buy when you're older. It's usually something people start buying, wealthy people start buying after they've bought everything else. Because then it's sort of like, well, I want something truly unique. I want something that nobody else has. I already own every car. I've traveled to every location on Earth. And art it's a very exclusive thing. It's I was having a conversation with another artist about this recently, that, one of the strange things about being a fine artist it doesn't matter how egalitarian you are. This is the only art form. Painters are one of the only sort of pursuits where your art form isn't democratic at all. You're not really trying to appeal to a mass audience. Writers, filmmakers, people producing TV shows, musicians, that's consumed by a mass audience, but painting isn't. Only one person buys a painting, and it's one very wealthy person. And so it's sort of like, I know I'm getting a little bit off topic from the question at hand, but it doesn't necessarily matter if 50,000 people love my paintings. I need one really rich person to love my paintings. Mm-hmm. And this is always the dilemma of the artist. And I don't think it's a bad thing. I mean, art has always been that way. It's always been the very wealthy that support it. But, my success as an artist hinges on whether or not rich people like me. And that's that I've been only very recently, and as you say, now that I'm, at an older age, and the people that might have more of an affinity for my subject matter are at a stage of their life where they might be starting to think about art, I'm now starting to do better as an artist. I have had people reach out to me saying, I've been following you for 10 years. I'm only now feeling like I'm ready to buy something from you. And that's really cool. That they come, 10 years later, they say, all right, well, I think I'm ready to buy something now. So it is, very much an age thing. Although I do think that within, let's say over the past 7 years, the work has become less specific to an age demographic as the work has started to include things from many generations of toys. The flight painting had the Arctic painting, these wildlife toy paintings. I mean, they have toys from many generations. So it's not entirely specific to, if you were born around the same time as me. Whereas for the first 6 or 7 years of what I was doing, it was very much like, a shared experience with those who are from the same generational background as me. So yeah, I mean, again, to answer your question, I think it's strange that a lot of the collectors I've had are not my age. They're older and they just thought the work was interesting. The CEO of Nike bought 2 of my huge paintings. Now, he's not from my generation, but he just thought the work was cool and he liked it and he wanted 2 paintings for his collection. And Mattel bought a painting, and obviously they had reasons for that, to buy a huge Battle Cat painting for their headquarters. They that's not just nostalgia for them, obviously, but some collectors that have bought work from me don't buy it simply because they played with these things as a kid, but they like them just as paintings. And that is part of the goal of this too. Can I get somebody who isn't interested in Star Wars to love my Star Wars painting? I mean, that would be an accomplishment to me if I could get somebody who has no interest whatsoever in Optimus Prime to really like my Optimus Prime painting. And that's not necessarily a prime goal of what I'm doing, but it is, it does, feel good when somebody who isn't just running purely on nostalgia likes the art just for the art's sake.
Robert, let me ask this question, and I don't think I've asked this before, but how do I phrase this? Your experience, and you've mentioned some really big names there, Mattel and CEO of Nike, and your work is just not like any others, right? It's not a 24 by 36. Some of these pieces could be as large as, and if I'm guessing here by the sheer size, could be as large as 10 feet tall by 15 feet wide. But logistically and just transactionally, how does the experience look like? Like, do they contact you because they found you somewhere, and then do they negotiate a rate with you, and then how is this even shipped to them? Like I said, this is not a typical question I ask but your art is just that different. Can you shed light a little bit on that?
Yeah. Well, that's sort of a business question, and that gets to the heart of marketing, I guess, which is not something that. I mean, I think ironically, when I first started this body of work in 2006, the paintings were huge, and they took me a long time. But they were paintings that if I was making today, I could make them much faster. Because it was just one big figure with a fairly basic pattern in the background. I could pump those out like crazy now, but as I've gotten better as a painter, as I've become, I think, more skilled over the years, the work itself has just become more dense and labor intensive, and I guess I'm a bit of a glutton for punishment in that regard. But I was getting more press back then in many ways when I first started this body of work, because I think it was easy to say to some news site like Wired or Boing Boing or Gizmodo, like, check out this Batman painting, check out this Battle Cat painting. Whereas now it's, a lot of the pop culture sites aren't, I would say over the past 5 years, aren't as interested in the work that has cross-generational toys and maybe has the wildlife element to it. And, the Battle for the Arctic is kind of a weird painting. And the Battle for the Arctic might be my favorite painting, but it is weird. It's not something that's going to be easily palatable to, let's say, a rich fanboy. But how do I mean, a lot of it's just been sheer luck. I've stuck with it so long that eventually people find you, and the longer you stick with it, the more people sort of decide, especially serious art collectors decide, okay, well, this person's serious about it, and they've now been doing this for 20 years, and they're building up a significant body of work, even if it's taken them forever to do it, and their work is just so slow, and my work is probably about as labor intensive as anything that's been done. I mean, it's so slow. But now, after 20 years, I'm at a point where I have a decent body of work that people can look through, and it's clearly demonstrated that I'm going to keep doing this, because I have a list of about 65 more enormous paintings that might take me another 25 years to make. I hope that I can do it for another 25 years. That would be both painful and beautifully rewarding, because the work is very difficult for me to make. It's very difficult to find a home for a 15-foot painting, but it's work that I'm passionate about, and I believe in a lot of the work that I'm making. So I don't really know if I answered your question at all. The business side of things is tricky, and it has been for a long time. I've had some luck, and I've had some really some great misfortune, and I've worked with some wonderful people in the art world, and I've worked with some terrible people in the art world. I've burned bridges that I shouldn't have burned at many points in time, that probably done a lot to damage my career still to this day. And I've also made a lot of friendships in the art world that have really helped me tremendously to this day. And anybody who knows me knows that I have a pretty tough chip on my shoulder, that I do my best not to show. I do my best to get that chip off of my shoulder. But I think that just comes with the territory of spending insane amounts of time doing something. And at many points in my adult life, I've been very, very poor, and a relative form of poverty, for sure. I mean, an artist's poverty is not somebody who's a coal miner. I mean, you're still lucky. You're very, very fortunate if you can figure out a way to keep going with a painting practice. And I have to keep that in perspective. But, I would say in the early 2010s, those were some difficult years where I was living in my warehouse and showering at the gym and eating noodles, for pretty much every meal. And I felt too old to be doing it back then. I wasn't in college at that point. I was well out of college at that point, and I still didn't think about giving up. I just felt that I needed to give up every other aspect of my life to keep going. And that's part of this sort of chip on my shoulder, is that it's required me at times to just give up everything and live a very sort of monastic hermit-like life. And, it's starting to pay off. I think, I hope. And more than anything else, I just hope that there are people out there that love the work as much as I do.
You mentioned this earlier. Can we talk about the painting titled The 20th Century Space Opera? This is one of the pieces that I think of when I think of your name and stuff. It's definitely a very creative way to showcase the Star Wars story. Could you just tell us a little bit on how that process came about, where you decided to paint that painting?
So like I said, I've had this practically since I started this body of work. I started compiling a list of these sort of, quote, dream paintings that I really want to make before I'm gone from this earth. And, the Star Wars painting was going to be at that time, I think, one of the most ambitious things that I had made. And, when I started the whole, I had to do a Kickstarter around getting, some funding for it, which brought some negative attention my way, but also some very good positive attention. And, it was to create something that was larger and more labor intensive than I had ever made. And, Disney hadn't even bought, Star Wars at that point. And then as I was releasing the Kickstarter, Disney, I think, had just announced that they were buying Star Wars, and then they were announcing that there was going to be a movie coming within 18 months or 2 years. And it was remarkably coincidental that all happened right after I had sort of started putting together this Kickstarter video for this epic Star Wars painting that was going to be the most ambitious thing I had made to that date. And I ended up finishing the painting about maybe 7 months before The Force Awakens came out. And, that was, admittedly, that was really positive timing in a lot of ways. Now, it didn't mean that Disney was going to have interest in the work. It didn't mean, that it's not a modern Disney Star Wars painting. It's just the old classics with a very few number of prequel things thrown in there, but it's really just a highlight of the old vintage Kenner toys. And I got lucky that because of that Kickstarter and because of, I think, the timing, that painting was timed well, not intentionally, but just, luckily, fortunately, well, with a lot of Star Wars hype that was happening at the time. But that Star Wars hype wasn't really happening when I started the Kickstarter, when I started making the video for the Kickstarter. So it was, that worked out well, I think, for me, although to this day, the painting still has not sold. It, even Wired magazine wrote an article about the Star Wars painting that no one will ever buy, which was,
is that right?
I'm sure. Yeah, they wrote an article called the $200,000 Star Wars painting no one will ever buy. Now it's a very tough clickbait headline for me to wake up and read. They did not tell me that was what the headline was going to be when they came to my studio for the interview. It's not a terribly negative article. It's just a tough headline to read.
What was the premise of that article, and why would they say that? Is it because of the sheer size and most people can't house anything that big, or is it because of the price tag?
Yes. I don't think it's the price tag. In fact, even though the painting's unsold, the price of the painting has gone up considerably since then, just based off of the sales of other work. It's more, I think, for that, it depends what world you're in, right? In the art world, $200,000 for a 15-foot by 8-foot painting is nothing to a lot of people in the art world, which is sort of unfathomable to think about. But to your average person, spending $200,000 on a painting is nuts. And that's what sort of pushes this out of the realm of fan art and into the fine art world, is that you're saying, that this isn't something that I'm going to give away for free. This isn't something that I view as cheap or something that I do as a hobby. It's something that I think has value, but it's a painting that took 2,000 hours, over 2,000 hours, if I'm being honest, to make. And if you spend over 2,000 hours of studio time spread out over 18 months of your life working on something, you're going to sort of feel like it has that kind of value. And the $200,000 price tag, that doesn't take into consideration that whatever dealer or gallery you're working with is going to get a significant cut. That's just, that's the nature of the art world. That's how it works. And that's fine. But, I think a lot of it's the scale. I don't think there's a huge amount of people out there that are looking. They may love Star Wars, but they're not exactly looking for a 15-foot by 8-foot Star Wars oil painting. I mean, the amount of times that I've heard from people, I would love to get this, but my wife says no. And that's, I know I have a lot of, female Star Wars fans that like what I do, but generally there's some truth to that. Like, I think when it comes to curating the art collection in the home, wives often are the ones calling the shots, and wives are not going to be particularly excited about a 15-foot by 8-foot painting of Star Wars action figures. It's tough to live with. It's not, admittedly, it's not an easy thing to live with, but that's not why. I guess I've never really been thinking about that stuff when I make it, which is a good thing and a bad thing. The subject matter is so commercial. It's part of the irony again. The subject matter of the work is so commercial, and yet the work is as far from commercial as it gets. And, the Star Wars painting is a strange one. It's an unusual painting. Admittedly, it's a very unusual painting, and I wanted to make something that was different from a kind of Hildebrand poster or a Drew Struzan poster. Those are artists that I absolutely adore, but I wanted to do something that was not kind of catering to what your typical Star Wars fan would automatically want, but more to what somebody who likes fine art and Star Wars. Somebody who likes the fine art world, the visual arts, the history of art as much or more than they like Star Wars. So it is, like I said, admittedly, it's a strange painting, and it's an enormous painting, and it's expensive and very difficult to figure out where that painting belongs. I've had a difficult time in my career figuring out where I belong as an artist. I've always been told that I sort of belong somewhere else. The Comic-Con crowd asks me why I'm there. The fine art crowd thinks that I belong at Comic-Con. It's too big for most commercial galleries. It's too expensive for the fan art world. It's a little bit too conceptual for the fan art world. It's too nerdy and lowbrow for the highbrow world. It's been difficult to figure out where exactly I belong as an artist, but I'm still, like I said, I'm still pretty passionate about it.
Robert, what's your favorite art piece and why?
Favorite art piece that I've done?
Yes.
Or favorite art piece in general?
Yeah, like what's your, out of all the, because everything is stunning visually, but is there one that I guess would deem your favorite art that you've actually painted?
Yeah, there's it's really hard to pick one that means the most to me. I mean, the Battle Cat, the Cringer painting, as some of the He-Man fans want to remind me, it's not Battle Cat, it's Cringer, because he doesn't have his armor on. The Battle Cat painting that I made in 2006 was the first giant toy painting I made, and it's the first painting I honestly felt authentic. It didn't feel contrived. It didn't feel like something I was making for art school or for that I knew the art world was going to love. I made it for me, and I made it, and I loved it. And I thought it was an interesting painting. I thought there was more going on with the work beyond the surface of the work. And that painting will always be a very fond one for me. But it's certainly not my my best painting, and it's not one of my best paintings. It's just, the work has obviously evolved a lot since 2006. I'm a much, much better painter now than I was back then. And I've often told people that the last toy painting I ever make will be a Panther painting. It'll be a mirror image to the Cringer, but it'll be Panther. And that'll bookend the toy series. And it means that it's a painting I'll probably never make. But that's how I view sort of the end of the toy series, is this 9-foot wide Panther. The flight painting means a lot to me just because it was the most labor intensive painting that I made. It was nearly 3,000 hours of studio time. I was more productive during those years of my life. I was fairly poor at that time, but I was so productive in the studio. I was painting, and I was really in that painting zone where I could paint, 15 hours a day, every day of the week for months on end. I was just insanely productive. And I haven't really been in that kind of painting mode again for that length of time since then. And that was a painting that you spend so much time alone with a painting, it does become this intimate experience for you. You know every inch of that giant canvas, and you can think, about things that you were listening to on the radio or on your phone as you were painting certain things in the painting, because you were just so deeply, intensely involved in the making of it. But the flight painting, the dinosaur painting is one that I love. It's funny, I have a friend who thinks it's just an awful painting, but he's a friend of mine who he was very honest with me about how he felt about the work. He was a great fan, but he wasn't shy to tell me if he thought something wasn't good.
Really? He's talking about the Dinosaur Toys?
Well, he didn't. I guess for him, a lot of it was the color scheme.
I'm being honest. It's stunning. I mean,
It's one of my favorites. But the color reaction for a lot of people is not one that they enjoy. I view it as one of my favorites. The dinosaur, the flight, the battle cat, and the gorilla painting is one that means a lot to me.
Robert, just a couple more questions here. We're near the end. I asked this question to artists, and this is probably my favorite question I ask. Since when you graduated from your art studies, has your career been everything you thought it would be, or has there been anything that has surprised you about it?
Oof. It's a good question.
Take your time. That's a curveball. I've tried to answer that question myself, too. It definitely makes you think.
Yeah. It sort of gets to the heart of like how you view success in a way. Has my career been everything that I thought it would be? And I mean, there are always these goals in life, and success in some ways becomes a sort of shifting goalpost. Something that I wanted to achieve when I was 20 is no longer something back in, when I was 22, 23 years old, just having a solo show at a gallery is, yes, success. I've made it. After you've had a few solo shows, that's not exactly the measure of success anymore. And the path of art has been a very, very challenging one at times. And art can be, your pursuit of as an artist can be many different things. I mean, every artist's life is different. They're not the same. It depends a lot on what kind of art you're making. It depends on what your circumstances are in life. I mean, your path as an artist is not going to be the same as any other artist's path, or very few other artists are going to have the same path as you. Everyone's different. Everyone's life's different. Success as an artist is very difficult to define. For me, it's always been, am I able to get to a point where I can have a family and have a thriving art practice where I get to make all of my dream paintings? That's sort of the dream scenario. And I don't think it's only recently that I felt like I'm kind of in that stage of my life where I can think about those things. It's taken a long time to get there. Art has been very, very rewarding and fulfilling at times. But to spend 20 years to make a handful of paintings that are only going to be viewed by most people online and then very quickly dismissed, I mean, that's a tough pill to swallow, but I still believe that the work is rewarding, and it's brought me some very interesting experiences. I mean, I got to teach a class at Pixar. I taught a painting class to Pixar employees simply because I was, a fine artist working in San Francisco at the right time, and the right person asked me if I was interested in doing that. And, that was a really interesting experience to be at Pixar in Emeryville for a few months teaching painting. I've met some very interesting people in the art world and some very interesting collectors that have, given me a glimpse into their lives, and I've given them a glimpse into mine. And art it can be a fascinating pursuit. It can be heaven and hell. It can be as hard as you want it to be or as easy as you want it to be. It can be a serious vocation, or it can be a part-time hobby. But for me, I've been intensely devoted to this since art school, and it's really the only thing I've had in my life, to be honest. And whether or not I find anybody else would find that worthwhile or rewarding I don't know. But I don't think I've really answered your question, but I've tried my best to answer the question here.
No, that was great, and that was really thoughtful, and thank you for that candid answer. It really was. Robert, final question here for you. For the people who are fans of your work, how do they particularly get one of your pieces? Can they commission a piece? Do you sell prints of your work? Are you represented by a gallery? Just how does that look like if someone is a fan of your work and wants to connect and obtain one of your pieces?
Well, right now, I guess I'm kind of happy to say that I really don't have anything available. I do have some paintings that are unsold, but I'm holding on to them for, this upcoming museum show. And yeah, like I said earlier, I've had some good success recently, over the past couple of years. I've been pretty fortunate with some collectors that have been sort of championing my work. I used to sell prints on my website. I've stopped selling them for the time being. I may start selling them again at some point. And I would say that if you're interested in the print, you can reach out and ask me if there are any prints available. They're probably not. I'm sold out of a lot of the prints that I was offering. But if they follow me on social media, they may find I'll let people know if I'm selling prints again. In terms of commissions, I used to take on a few commissions here and there. I recently took on a whole slew of commissions for a collector in Asia, but I probably won't be taking on any more commissions until 2024 at the earliest. I don't know. I wish I could say, yeah, just go to my website, send me an email, and ask me if you're interested in something, and I'll tell you if it's available. But it probably isn't. But, I guess that's about it. The Star Wars painting, like I said, is still available, and it's more expensive than $200,000. So if somebody's interested in that, they can reach out to me.
Robert, fantastic. Thank you for sharing your creative journey with us. And again, lastly, could you just remind us where people can connect with you or plug in any of those? I think you have an upcoming art show.
Yeah. So I have a solo show coming up at the Oceanside Museum of Art. It's my first solo museum show. It's going to be about 4 months long, February 18th to June 5th, I believe. And it'll be kind of a bit of a retrospective of work that I've been making for the past 10 to 15 years. The Star Wars painting is on display at Rancho Obi-Wan. You can book tours to that. It's up in Petaluma. If you go to Rancho Obi-Wan, their website, they find out how to buy tickets. They have a really fascinating collection of Star Wars memorabilia, every Star Wars toy that's ever been produced, at least until Disney bought them and bought Star Wars, I should say. And my Instagram is at rxburden, and my website is robertxburden.com. And that's about it. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate you reaching out and asking me to do this.
Absolutely. And thank you, Robert. Listeners, please connect with Robert. Check out his work. And until next time, everyone, take care and bye.